laughing at the idea of Trump TV. Do you really think you can compete with this? On a very special anniversary episode of this very real reality show, Donald J. Trump, billionaire and candidate, turns 1 year old. They grow up so fast. It seems like just yesterday, the coiffed billionaire was riding his gilded escalator right into the 2016 race. 365 days later, the tension between Trump and his party over campaign strategy, rhetoric, and, well, just about everything is only growing more intense. Every day seems to bring fresh voices of Republican dissension and dissent. Today, it came from Richard Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of State under George W. Bush, who told Politico he will vote for Hillary Clinton. Trump made clear in his Atlanta speech yesterday that he's willing to travel the lonely road, and he told GOP leaders to, quote, be quiet. But at a weekly Capitol Hill press conference today, House Speaker Paul Ryan gave no indication that he will hold his tongue, and he left the door somewhat ajar when asked if he would rescind his endorsement of Trump.
I don't have a plan to do that. Look, we're going to agree to disagree on some things. That's just the way things work. Mitt Romney and I didn't agree on everything. He's a different kind of candidate. This is a different kind of year. I'm going to be myself and speak up in defense of our principles.
John Kasich, the governor of the state where the Republican National Convention will take place next month, that would be Ohio, said in an interview with Morning Joe that he might never back his party's presumptive nominee, despite the pledge he made to support whoever becomes the GOP standard bearer.
It's painful. You know, people even get divorces. You know, I mean, sometimes things come about that, look, I'm sorry that this has happened. But, I mean, we'll see where it ends up. I'm not making any final decision yet, but at this point, I just can't do it.
The absolutely wonderful and splendiferously spectacular Alex Wagner from The Atlantic is here with me today instead of Mark Halperin. So, Alex, let me ask you this question. The relationship between Donald Trump and his party, this kind of uneasy thing that's going on, it seems untenable, like feels like something's got to give. John Kasich used the word divorce just now. So I want you to just ask the question, is it conceivable that there could be a divorce, a formal divorce between the Republican Party and Donald Trump? And if there was a formal divorce, what would it look like?
I don't think, well, first of all, I would argue that there is actually a marriage. I feel like we have had a very prolonged dating. And we have a prenup sort of signed, but there's not actually been a marriage, which would likely take place in Cleveland in this summer. I don't think there will ever be a formal divorce. I think the closest you will see the Republican establishment getting to disavowing Trump is saying, I can't do this right now, and then just hoping that people don't ever ask them the question again. Right. Paul Ryan, you said, left the door slightly ajar, John. I believe that is a dictionary definition of leaving the door open.
Yes,
to maybe
wildly
open.
So I think here's what I think about this. First of all, I think it's entirely possible that Paul Ryan will rescind his endorsement of Donald Trump. I think there's no question that he was very purposeful today, and I think it's not there's no permanence to that marriage. I think that's what the divorce would look like. The divorce would start with Paul Ryan, the most senior Republican in the party, announcing, I'm sorry, I thought we could work, I could be with him, I can no longer be with him. And I think that day would come if we continue to see Donald Trump's poll numbers fall. Right now, the reason the party is with him to the extent that it's with him is because their view is that that Trump is not a nominee we love, but for our purposes, Senate and the House, for our purposes, sticking with him makes more sense. There will be more damage if we left him than if we stayed with him. If it starts to be clear that there will be more damage in staying with him than with leaving him, I think they could leave him.
Sure. I think that this is all about which way the wind is blowing. If it's strongest enough to take down ballot races, then you'll see departures. I don't know that you're going to see full-throated rescinding of endorsements. But let's move on to the next topic as it pertains to marriage and divorce, John, which is assuming that Trump and the GOP decide to stay together. I mean, what does that practically look like? How do you make it work, as you will, in the next 6 months?
Well, I think it looks a lot like what it looks like now, which is a lot of discomfort, a lot of people unhappy. This is why I do feel like there's like something has to give, because it's hard to imagine 6 months of Trump saying
He's made it very clear that he doesn't care what anybody says. He's going to say what he's going to say.
Wait, so where does who gives what?
As he continues to say controversial things, it seems implausible to me that you could have 6 months of Republican leaders never siding with him, never defending him, and criticizing him whenever he says something they find too offensive. Like, can that really go on for 6 months? I mean, I guess it could. But what a
if you look at where there's
what a
been
spectacle.
If we're going with this sort of marriage metaphor,
right.
if they're in counseling, the party that has been giving and been most elastic
right.
through all of this has been the establishment. And so for it to
or
work,
you could say Craven.
Yeah, well, but what and when does Donald Trump give?
Well, I think, look, to me, yesterday was a really important moment, I think, in the campaign, precisely because Donald Trump standing up and saying, they may not be with me, and I don't care. They should just quiet down. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. It's about as clear a statement as you could have that he has no intention of moderating his tone, modifying his behavior, giving in your lexicon in the context of counseling. I don't think he's going to do it. And that's why I think, it's so hard to imagine the dump Trump movement actually dumping him at this convention in Cleveland. So hard to imagine. But there's more talk about it now among senior Republicans than there's been for a long time. This discussion has waxed and waned. But right now, there's a lot of discussion about what it would take. Is it possible? What damage would be done if they actually just said, forget it, we can't have him be the nominee?
Well, you also would think that, at some point Trump would have a sort of battle plan or a plan generally about how he wanted to engage members of his own party. And the thing that we have learned, John, in the last year is that Donald Trump rarely has a long-term plan. It's unclear if he has a day-long plan.
Right.
This is a man whose whims and sort of the emotional tenor of his own sort of personal imagination largely dictate the moves of his campaign.
Yes, and look, I mean, one of the other signs that we've seen just in those last days is these reports about the tension between Trump and the RNC. It's very clear Trump is not listening to Reince Priebus. Reince Priebus does not have his ear in any meaningful way. Again, it's hard. Priebus will be the last holdout, I think. But I keep going back to Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, who's been scolding Trump regularly. Is it possible there have been a couple? Mark Kirk, I believe, is one person who's said he won't endorse. I just think it's not impossible if things get really bad in the next 3 weeks that suddenly you will see people saying, I'm sorry, just can't do this.
Reince Priebus is, to note, going to Dallas with Donald Trump and is saying, all is well here.
Yes. He says all the reports are false.
Yes.
Let's be clear. Reince Priebus says there is no tension, nothing to see here. We're all one big happy family. How much do you believe that?
How much is the prenup worth?
Not very much. Okay. Hillary Clinton released her first wave of general election ads today. We will talk about what's in them and also about the gun control debate brewing in Washington after these words from our sponsors. Today, President Obama and Vice President Biden went to Orlando to pay respects to the families of the victims from Sunday's nightclub shooting. It was a scene of bipartisanship as the president descended from Air Force One with Marco Rubio and Florida Democratic Congresswoman Corrine Brown. After meeting with the families, Obama again made a pitch for more gun restrictions and honored the lives that were lost.
They are our family. They're part of the American family. And today, the Vice President and I told them on behalf of the American people that our hearts are broken too.
Next word there. Back in Washington, the fight over gun control continues. After a 15-hour filibuster Democrats staged on the Senate floor yesterday, seems to have worked. Republicans have reportedly committed to vote on 2 gun control amendments to an appropriations bill. Those amendments, which will likely be voted on Monday, would expand background checks and bar suspected terrorists from purchasing firearms. Over the past 24 hours, some Republicans in tough re-election fights, Rob Portman of Ohio, Kelly Ayotte from New Hampshire, and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, have indicated a willingness to compromise. Alex, given the fact that Democrats are in this kind of unusual circumstance, we have a nominee, a presumptive nominee in Hillary Clinton, who is clearly going to make gun control a big part of her campaign at the presidential level in a way that no nominee has in a long time. What do you think that what we've seen from her and from how things are kind of shifting around this week, what do you think this portends for down ballot races, Senate races, House races for the gun control debate? What effect might it have in those races?
So I think we've already seen an enormous amount of concerted coordination between the upper levels of the Democratic Party and the foot soldiers on Trump. And I think that you're going to see the same thing happen on guns, because as much as we say this is a story that keeps happening, this is the umpteenth time the president has had to eulogize victims and speak to their families, this moment feels particularly different. Not just because of 2016, but because of a sense of broad American frustration around the issue of gun safety reform. So to answer your question, I think this is a campaign. I mean, this has always been a sort of political issue, but it will be very much a campaign issue in a coordinated fashion through the end of the year.
Right. One of the things that's really changed here, that Hillary Clinton has clearly detected that, not just in the Democratic nomination fight, but also at the general election level, that she thinks that gun control is a winning issue for her. That's a big change. The other thing that's really changed, and I think Orlando had changed it in a very specific way, which is that now the question of gun control is now linked to terrorism in a way it's never been before. And so you have, but this obviously started with San Bernardino, but this is a new thing, right? And one doesn't ever like to talk about who wins or loses politically from these horrible atrocities. But in this case, if you're for gun control, being able to have the extra argument, which is, hey, if you're against gun control, you're on the side of the terrorists, right? That becomes another card that can be played. And I think Democrats in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Hampshire, maybe even Arizona with the John McCain race, Missouri where Roy Blunt's up for re-election, purple states where Republicans are vulnerable, I think a lot of those Democratic senators will start to make this argument and puts those people, those Republicans, in a difficult position if they're not going to at least make some nods towards being able to talk about, make some nods towards changing the laws, at least for something like allowing people denying people weapons who have been on the no-fly list.
Sure. Well, and I think you're right to note that this conflates 2 issues. The other issue it conflates is gay rights, and the LGBT movement has proven to be a very powerful and effective, not just lobbying, but campaign and advocacy arm in American politics, and they are fired up about this issue. So it adds sort of a third triangulated dynamic to this, if you will. Right. One that I don't think plays as well down ballot, but certainly if you talk about the national race, and another reason for Hillary Clinton to embrace this or wrap her arms around the issue, and Orlando in particular, that certainly is a deciding factor.
Right. We have all become, with good reason, have become skeptical to the point of cynical about the ability for the gun control debate to change because of the power of the NRA. You know, we saw after Sandy Hook, there was so much effort put into changing the gun laws. There was so much concerted action on the part of the president, the vice president, everybody, and yet nothing happened, right? I do think, to go back to this first point, I do think that this is a different moment, and it's different precisely because the scale of the atrocity is so great. Greatest mass shooting in American history, and there's this other element there where there's a jujitsu thing that Democrats can do because of the link to terrorism. And I think, you know, especially if Clinton campaigns on it like this, and especially if the composition of the Senate, maybe the House change, we could finally be there where at least some modest gun control could actually happen. Probably not next week or the week after, but maybe a year from now.
Speaking of Hillary Clinton, she rolled out her first TV ad blitz of the general election season today, with spots going up on the air in 8 key general election states, ranging from Nevada and New Hampshire to Florida and Ohio. Both ads are part of a more than $7 million buy over the next 6 weeks, and they focus primarily on Clinton's biography, especially her advocacy on behalf of children and families. Here's one that takes a look at Clinton's tenure as First Lady decades ago.
For Hillary, it's always been about kids. And when millions couldn't get health care, this First Lady worked with Republicans and Democrats to fix it, creating the Children's Health Insurance Program.
So that every child gets the health care that child deserves to have.
Now, 8 million kids are covered. That's the kind of leader she is, and the kind of president she'll be.
Here's another ad about Clinton's more recent international work.
And as Secretary of State, she stood up for American values around the world, working to end men and girls. Through the years, there have been challenges, setbacks, but for Hillary, one thing's never changed.
She needs to push Clinton, and a lot of weaknesses. True is that Donald Trump's negatives are so high, it's hard to imagine them being much higher than they are. When your unfavorables are at 70%, right, and you're in the trouble that he's in, the reason you do negative ads is to drive up the other candidates' unfavorables. His are already almost as high. They're almost at the theoretical limit, because the truth is, among, there are at least 30% of hardcore Republicans who are going to vote for Trump no matter what.
Sure.
So what are you going to do? You're going to go spend millions of dollars to try to push up the guy's negatives when everybody already knows that that people who don't like him, they're already high, right?
It's done.
Or at least it's done for now, and there's more work to do on this side.
It also is a study in contrast insofar as there's this concerted ad buy across major markets, right, important markets, and it's a message that you would never see from the Trump campaign, right? You're struck by the contrast in campaign styles and campaign possibilities. It's hard to imagine the Trump campaign releasing an analog ad.
Here's the other thing that's worth noting about this, right, just to go through it. Virginia, $1.6 million. Ohio, $1.3. Iowa, $1 million, under $1 million, but still big numbers in Colorado, New Hampshire, Florida, North Carolina, Nevada. $7.3 million in total. You know how much that's matched by the Trump campaign in those states? Zero, nil, nada, zilch. And this is part of what's going on here with why Trump is in so much trouble. His poll numbers are collapsing. This disparity, him not being in the battleground states and not on the air in the battleground states, could come back to haunt him severely by the end of this election. All right, coming up, we will have more from the president's trip to Orlando. And later we'll talk to Bernie Sanders' campaign manager, Jeff Weaver. We'll be right back.
if we're honest with ourselves, if in fact we want to show the best of our humanity, then we're all going to have to work together at every level of government, across political lines, to do more to stop killers who want to terrorize us.
Welcome back. That was more from President Obama's remarks today in Orlando, where he met with the families of the victims of Sunday's shooting. Alex, we've seen President Obama in this setting so many times now, tragically, obviously. What do you think about what's going through his mind now? I mean, obviously, there's a great sense of sadness and a great sense of frustration that on this issue, particularly one he cares about a lot, we've talked about before, gun control earlier in the show. When he has to go and do this again and again, what kind of psychic toll do you think that takes on a president? So this president
has said the hardest day of his presidency was the day he had to meet with the families of the Newtown shooting. Yeah. And he admitted, there have been a lot of hard days in his presidency. So I think, if you talk about the psychic toll, these are the most trying times for this president, going into the room, as he always does, to meet with the families and talk to them about their dead children, which is not, a task any president would have to do. The sheer number of times that he's had to do it is tragic in and of itself. I think, John, this moment is probably different insofar as he's looking at the rest of his presidency and is fairly resigned to the fact that nothing real is likely to happen on the national level when it comes to gun safety. And that is cause for not just frustration, but probably some small measure of anger. Right.
You think about, when Mark and I wrote Double Down, we wrote about this moment as he was getting ready to run for re-election in 2012, and he was talking to his senior aides and talking about the things that he felt bad about, that he was being self-critical, issues that he had not done enough, in his judgment, on in his first term. Some of them were things like climate change and global warming, same-sex marriage, and another was gun control. He was able in the second term to move the ball, or at least come to the position that he really genuinely believed on many of those issues. For instance, climate change, where he got the climate deal done. Same-sex marriage, where he came around eventually before the end of the campaign in 12. I think in some ways, not only has this been frustrating for him, but I think he will look back on, this was the one issue, gun control that is, an issue where he, I think, still is self-reproachful that in his first 4 years, he may not have been able to do anything about it. You could argue what the politics of it were, but that it was a place where something he genuinely believed he didn't really campaign on in 2008 and didn't really do anything about or try to do anything about in the first 4 years. Obviously, that has changed after Sandy Hook, but it's still, I think, something that he will kind of regret.
I think
how he handled it.
Yeah, I mean, and if you talk about the sort of the remorse and the sadness he feels, there's certainly the issue, but there's also the dynamic of parents who've lost their children. He was in Orlando today with Joe Biden, and it was noted by some of the press that was covering there was more of a sort of emotional contact between the president and vice president, and understandably so, given the fact that Joe Biden has, of course, lost his own son.
Let's go real quick to Chris Jansing, from NBC's senior White House correspondent, who's down in Florida covering the president's trip. Chris, just give us a sense of what this day has been like. We don't have a lot of time with you, but just give us a little sense of what it's like on the ground there.
Well, I think to Alex's point, one of the things that the president said today, and he spoke for 17 minutes after a meeting with the families, he said their grief is beyond description. He talked about the father of an 18-year-old girl who talked about how happy she was and what a bright future she had. And you can just imagine for Joe Biden as well, whose loss of his own son, Beau, is so close to him. But very quickly, after talking about what this has meant, he said, we are all family. They are part of the American family. We are all part of this family. He turned to the politics of it. He said that many of these family members were pleading with him to get something done to see that this doesn't happen again. And you have him in a situation where clearly, as you pointed out, he has been frustrated, especially in the aftermath of Newtown. We saw him very emotional. We saw him emotional just a couple of days ago that some of these legislative initiatives have died, and now they're back in the forefront in the middle of a hotly contested political season. He's got 6 months left. He also has high approval ratings, and he sounded not just frustrated but determined, as we have heard him before, but clearly walking that line of a political leader today, but also consoler-in-chief.
Chris, let me ask you this. We have about 20 seconds. Does the White House think there's really any chance that anything can move on Capitol Hill on this issue, or are they actually resigned, as Alex suggested?
Yeah, I think that, when you talk to them in their honest moments, they don't give it a whole lot of chance. But I will say that I spoke to the dad of one of the victims in Columbine, who told me after San Bernardino, you hope at some point, instead of weariness, there is a cumulative effect of people just saying enough. So I think that if there is any hope, they feel like it's got to happen quickly.
All right, Chris Jansing, thank you. Coming up, we have Bernie Sanders' campaign manager, Jeff Weaver. We'll be right back with that. Tonight, Bernie Sanders is delivering an online video address to his millions of supporters across the country. It's a speech that he's dubbing "The Political Revolution Continues." Joining us now from Burlington, Vermont, is one of the grand marshals of his potential march to the convention in Philadelphia, Sanders campaign manager Jeff Weaver. Jeff, it's great to be with you. Great to have you. Hi, how's it going?
Thank you.
Doing well?
Things are going great.
Fabulous. Can you give us a little preview of what Senator Sanders is likely to say tonight, other than that the political revolution continues?
Well, I think it's a continuation of what happened on Sunday when he met with some of his more prominent supporters and surrogates, talking about how we move a progressive agenda forward, how we transform America. His presidential campaign is and always has been really about how we transform America and not really about him. So, I started working with him 30 years ago this month, and he was saying the same thing then he says now, and he'll be saying it, God willing, 30 years from now. And how we move forward now to create the kind of progressive change we need is really the challenge, and that's what he's going to be talking about tonight.
So is he going to be, again, understanding all that, are there tangible steps that he's going to lay out? Well,
I think he will, and I don't want to preview it too much, but I think this is an opportunity for him to talk to the millions and millions of people who voted for him, directly, unfiltered, and I think it'll be a very positive and uplifting speech, and I think well received by the people who worked hard on this campaign and supported him.
Jeff, Alex Wagner here. Can you tell us a little bit more about the meeting between Senator Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and whether anything transpired in that meeting that might move Senator Sanders closer towards endorsing Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think it was a very positive meeting. It was very cordial. Of course, the two of them know each other. They served together in the Senate together. There was a lot of substance. There was a lot of talk about substantive policy issues. They're both kind of wonkish, frankly. And they talked about a lot of the issues where they're close and some of the issues, frankly, where they're not so close. But it focused much more on substantive policy than it did on, process issues.
So, Jeff,
although there was talk about reforming the electoral process, reforming the Democratic Party, and making it more inclusive and broadening its base.
So, Jeff, one of the things you all have been saying and that Senator Sanders has been saying pretty consistently since in the days since voting stopped in the Democratic nomination fight has been that you're going to continue the campaign on to the convention. Just tell me what that,
yes.
what does that mean?
Well, what it means is, look, there is a progressive agenda that he laid out. The country has a lot of needs. Those needs have not changed just because the voting has stopped. His life's work has been to advance those agenda items, dealing with income inequality, dealing with a corrupt campaign finance system, getting health care to everybody, making the country a more fair and equitable place. Those issues still exist. And the needs and the desires of the people who supported him and the people who didn't support him still exist. And he's going to continue working on that through the convention. Right.
But, Jeff, does he intend to challenge her at the convention, or are you talking about just him continuing to advocate for the issues he's always cared about? There's a lot of vagueness in continue my campaign until the convention. Does he still believe he's trying to win the Democratic nomination?
Well, I think you'll see at the convention we'll have a unified party coming out of it. I think there will be a discussion of a lot of the substantive issues, including some issues that separated the candidates. And I think this is an opportunity for those issues to be aired,
Jeff,
and for the rank and file of the Democratic Party to address those issues.
Jeff, his campaign was to win the Democratic nomination. So is he still campaigning to win the Democratic nomination or not?
Well, he still is a candidate for the Democratic nomination. Certainly that's the case. He's going to go.
Is the campaign making calls to superdelegates?
We're not currently lobbying superdelegates. We are not. No.
Do you have any expectation that you're going to start lobbying superdelegates? Or is that effort now over?
I don't anticipate that will start anytime soon.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Is Debbie Wasserman Schultz going to remain head of the Democratic National Committee?
Well, you saw there was an announcement today, reported widely, that there is a new chief of staff there who will be taking over day-to-day operations. That's certainly a very positive step forward. As you know, our campaign and our millions of supporters have felt that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has not been an honest broker in this process. That she has led to more division in the party. It was really not in a position to offer the leadership we need to bring the party together in the fall.
So is that a yes or a no?
I don't know whether she'll remain on as a sort of titular head or not, but the fact that day-to-day operations have been put in somebody else's hands is a very, very positive sign for the party.
Wait a second, Jeff. Are you trying to say that the move today, in your view, means that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is no longer the effective chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee?
Well, I just read the news coverage, so I can't tell you more than that. But it did say that day-to-day operations were being turned over to somebody else.
Let me put it this way. You guys have said in the past that one of the conditions for Senator Sanders ultimately endorsing Secretary Clinton is that Debbie Wasserman Schultz be removed, correct? That's been your posture.
Well, he certainly has advocated for her removal.
Right. So is that part of the I'll ask you the precursor question. Is her removal part of what he wants in order to eventually come around to supporting Secretary Clinton? Yes or no?
Well, I wouldn't draw the connection quite so directly, but I would say this, that he articulated the other day in his press conference. The first item he talked about was the chairwoman's leadership and the fact that in order to bring this party together, we need leadership at the DNC that can unite the party, that is not seen as divisive, and that can do what needs to be done to have a harmonious convention.
So does a new chief of staff satisfy you? Is that what you're saying? That if there's a new chief of staff handling day-to-day operations, you don't mind if she stays on as the titular head of the party?
Well, we would certainly prefer that she be removed or that she step down. I think at this point, that's really the best course for the party.
Can I ask you, Jeff?
I mean, I find it hard to believe that at the convention there won't be hundreds or a couple of thousand people booing when she comes on stage, despite our efforts to make sure that doesn't happen.
Is the removal of Debbie Wasserman Schultz more or less important than the reform of the nomination process on the Democratic side with superdelegates and the like?
Well, they're all important, and certainly superdelegates is an incredibly important issue. But it's all part and parcel to transforming the Democratic Party. It needs to be opened up. It needs to have a grassroots focus. It needs to bring in all the people that Bernie Sanders brought into the process. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz is not really the person to do that.
Right. Jeff, let me put it to you this way. There are a variety of things that you guys are for, right? There's things on policy that where you have differences with Secretary Clinton. There's things in the platform. There's process reforms, including same-day registration, open primaries, end of superdelegates. Are all of those, if I describe all those things to you, was it fair to say that those are all things that you were trying to negotiate with the Clinton campaign as some kind of a package that would then lead Senator Sanders to endorse Secretary Clinton? Is that a fair characterization of what's going on currently?
Well, I think it's a fair characterization to say that those issues are all under discussion between the campaigns, both at the staff level and the other night among the candidates, among the principals. So, yes, we are discussing those issues.
Right, but you're saying that not that all of them are non-negotiable. Obviously, you're in negotiations, right? But that if Secretary Clinton gives on some of those issues, and you guys find a mutually agreeable set of concessions, so to speak, that will then lead to Senator Sanders endorsing Secretary Clinton before the convention. Is that true or false?
I wouldn't say they're concessions. I wouldn't describe them as concessions. What I would say is that almost 12 million people voted for Bernie Sanders. He won 23 contests, 22 states, and Democrats abroad. So there's a huge part of the Democratic base that supported his agenda and the reforms that he wants to enact. And I think it is best for the party if the Clinton campaign acknowledges that reality and reaches out to those voters with tangible, concrete changes that will let those people know that their voice had been heard in this process.
So let me remove the word concessions. Let me just come back to the original question, which was, if you guys can reach a package of changes, some of which she will agree to, some of which she may not agree to. Again, I'm not suggesting that you're saying all of these are non-negotiable. You must have X, Y, or Z. But if you guys reach an agreement on some set of those changes taking place, the result of that will be Senator Sanders endorsing Secretary Clinton before the convention. Yes or no?
Well, I would say that the party will be unified. Senator Sanders has always said that he will support the Democratic nominee. So I think that after a period of conversation, both with the Clinton campaign and with our supporters, we would like to get to a place where we could very actively support the nominee.
Right, and that nominee is Secretary Clinton in this case. I mean, again, you basically conceded you're not trying to switch superdelegates' votes. You have no plans to do that. So you're basically saying Secretary Clinton is essentially the presumptive nominee at this point, and you're trying to get to the point where you can be behind her.
Well, certainly she's been called the presumptive nominee by the media, that's for sure.
But I'm asking you, Jeff, at this point. You're willing to accept that notion, right?
I know you are.
I mean, you're effectively saying he's not actively campaigning to be the Democratic nominee anymore. You're no longer doing the things that would be required to make him the nominee, i.e. flipping superdelegates, and you're having a set of negotiations over things that you would like her to do that are kind of, you're essentially saying, are a price for his support. Is that, again, is there anything I've said just now that's untrue?
I think it speaks for itself, John.
Jeff, as the Clinton campaign, how would you characterize the relationship between the two campaigns at this point?
Oh, I think the relationship is very good. Staff contacts have been frequent and friendly. I think we're really digging down into the weeds on a number of issues. The meeting between the senator and the secretary was very good. So I think people are working together because they understand that we need to defeat Donald Trump in the fall. I mean, that's an imperative.
Jeff, thank you for coming on. Thank you for making, I believe, a little bit of news. And
I don't think I made any news. I never make news.
That's all you ever do is make news. You also look remarkably healthy up there. I don't know if that's a tan or just good lighting, but you're looking very good.
Thank you. No, that's it. No makeup, nothing.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Right. Jeff Weaver, looking good. And
I'll have what he's having.
No kidding. Next up, we have Alex Conan, the former communications director for Marco Rubio's campaign, and the one and only Dan Senor, informal advisor to Paul Ryan, and so many other things. They'll join us to talk about Donald Trump and a lot of other stuff right after this word from our sponsors. Right here with us in studio, we have Dan Senor, a formal advisor to Speaker Paul Ryan and a lot of other things, and also Alex Conan, former communications director for Marco Rubio's presidential campaign. It's great to see you two. Alex has been waiting to see you all day long.
It's just I needed another Alex as backup.
Very excited about this. We just talked about Paul Ryan on the show, and I asserted, I think in an informed way, that the Speaker today was leaving the door wide open to rescinding his endorsement of Donald Trump. Is that true?
I think it's safe to say that a lot of Republican leaders are not terribly enthusiastic about the reboot of the Trump candidacy and the Trump campaign over the last few days, and so they are being reserved in how they express their enthusiasm about his candidacy. Whether he's leaving the door open a little bit, a lot, not at all, I'm not going to speculate on it. I'm just telling you I'm not surprised by how restrained you're hearing more and more Republican leaders.
But you know the Speaker pretty well, right? I mean, do you think there's a live option for him?
Not now.
Not now.
Not now.
But possibly.
I take him at his word.
I understand.
He says, you know, it's not something I plan to do or intend to do. So I don't think it's something he's contemplating doing. I think he's going through what a lot of Republican leaders are going through, which is they've endorsed Trump. They're planning to stick with Trump. They are concerned about his campaign. Right. They're concerned about the down-ballot collateral damage.
Are they concerned about the damage that a Trump endorsement might wreak on their own personal fortunes, which is to say Paul Ryan is seen by many as the hope of the Republican Party in 2020 and beyond. At a certain point, does he make a personal calculation?
I think I mean, I've talked on this particular point in terms of how to think about Trump. I've talked to him quite a bit, and his view is that, and again, I'm very critical of Trump. I'm very much out there, so what I say is not reflective of what he thinks. But one of the big factors for him is he has believed that if House Republicans are divided, it will do more, even if they think the things Trump is saying are reprehensible, it will do more damage to the chances of the Republicans keeping the majority than if they're at war with each other over Trump. That has been his view up to now.
Alex Conan, not Alex Wagner. Alex Conan, let me ask you this. Do you think that Republicans now have finally reached the conclusion? I've heard you on the show a couple times saying, well, Trump needs to change. He needs to moderate. He needs to be more presidential. Have you given that up now? Like a lot of Republicans, to me, seem to hear Trump and say, okay, that's a lost cause. He's going to be who he's going to be.
Losing hope is probably the right way to look at it. Donald Trump, if he's going to win this fall, he needs to create a campaign around him. He needs to have a message. He needs to have surrogates that go out and echo his message to compete with the Clinton machine. That is not happening. And he's been the presumptive nominee now for over 6 weeks. It's very troubling that we haven't taken those affirmative steps towards putting together the kind of campaign that he needs to put together, not just to win, but just to have it be close this fall. I mean, the trajectory in the polls right now is very troubling. If I'm Donald Trump, I'm worried about it.
But Alex, I guess when we hear party elders and strategists and related folks say Trump needs to build a campaign, Trump needs to get on message, Trump needs to do X, Y, and Z, one might as well say Trump needs to sprout wings and do several other things that will never naturally happen, given this man's trajectory thus far. I mean, what reason is there to still hold out hope that he will make these reforms in a timely fashion?
Look, because he wants to win. I believe that he wants to be president of the United States.
But
and
do
if
you
he wants
think
to win,
believes he needs to change in order to win?
Well, we're going to have to test that proposition, right? I mean, we're about to find out. If he wants to win, he needs to build a campaign, and he's not doing that as of now. The fact is that as of today, he only has 1 or 2 communicators on the whole campaign. They are doing yeoman's work. But I had 1 or 2 staffers last summer on the Plenty campaign, or excuse me, on the Rubio campaign, and we were struggling with the amount of incoming. I can only imagine what Trump's communicators are dealing with on a day-to-day basis right now.
No campaign organization, no fundraising. He's not raising money. Virtually no communication with the RNC. Continuing to say incredibly inflammatory things. Not communicating with Republican elected leaders. I mean, this guy's got one speed. You've seen a version of what you're seeing now in everything he's done in this election, in every part of his career. The way he communicates, he's got one speed. The idea that he's suddenly going to start looking and behaving presidential, I think, is wishful thinking.
As you pointed out, you are out front, never Trump. Hashtag never Trump, right? You're also, I think, pretty much out front, hashtag dump Trump at this point, right? You're doing some work behind the scenes right now trying to figure out a way to stop Donald Trump from being the nominee of the party, correct?
I will say that there are a number of people who are brainstorming on whether or not we can capitalize on right now. I do feel that we're a little bit of an inflection point. Right now, there's genuine concern among a lot of Republicans, among Republican elected leaders, among donors, and among activists, and among many delegates who are attending the convention. There is this moment where people are saying, wait a minute. And by the way, it's directly correlated with Trump's collapsing poll numbers. So I do think there's a correlation between tolerance for the insane things Trump does and the insane way he behaves and good poll numbers. The moment those poll numbers drop, tolerance goes down. And so now people are saying, wait a minute, this could be a real mess. And so there are discussions about whether or not he could be dislodged at the convention. Whether or not it's going to be able to get together between now and the next couple of weeks is a separate question, but there are conversations.
Or whether it's going to be about as successful as all of your efforts in the Never Trump movement.
Hey, come on.
Which yielded a giant. What's the percentage likelihood that Donald Trump's going to be the nominee of the party after the Cleveland convention? Percentage likelihood?
Oh, I would say 80+%.
John, I would just say, like, these things reach a tipping point, at which point the way we look at it changes. Everything changes overnight, and it doesn't happen. It's going to happen very quickly if it's going to happen. That is, there'll just be a moment where the support for him collapses and the political universe looks very different. 6 weeks from here to Cleveland, that is a long, long time in presidential politics, and a lot can change.
And yet you look at the numbers and you look at general American approval for each party, and Republican numbers are not, I'm sure, where the party wants it to be, the approval numbers. Are there conversations happening in Republican circles about November and what happens after November to the party if Trump loses?
I think people are still focused on November. But look, I'm old enough to remember in 1992, one of the people running for president, he was a self-funded billionaire. And he, at this point, he looked very viable. 6 weeks later, he dropped out of the race. That's Ross Perot.
Do you think Ross Perot is an appropriate analog?
I'm just saying a lot can happen between now and the convention, and even more will happen between the convention and November. So I think we take it one day at a time. The onus is on Trump to prove that he can put together a campaign that is capable of being competitive this fall. We have not seen that evidence yet.
Can I respond? Guys, now we got to go. But here's what I'm going to say right now is what Donald Trump would say to both of you, which is be quiet. Be quiet, Republicans.
It's better than your fire.
I can't believe you're dissing our Never Trump efforts.
Sorry. I just made an accurate account of its level of success.
It's not over.
Dan Senor, Alex Conant, Alex Wagner, thank you all three of you. Coming up, we have Donald Trump, the man of many words, maybe just one, retrospective of his first full year as a presidential candidate. That's going to be great to watch. And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can also listen to us on the radio and Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back. As you all know, today is a huge milestone moment in the political world. Exactly 1 year ago today, Donald J. Trump descended an escalator at Trump Tower to announce his presidential campaign.
Between then and now, Trump has said a lot of things, a whole lot of things, some amazing things. So we decided to take a look back at Trump's huge, unpredictable year, one word at a time.
Mexico, the raping polls captured 202 polls. Rosie blood making huge anchor baby. The Bible winning. Beautiful to fund the ratings. ISIS deportation. The belt. Molester. Remember, Muslims racist. Paul Schlong words. Corinthians. China stretcher. Chris Rubio. Hands. Snakes. Little brain. Balls. A wall. Punishment. Pope jumped. Lion. Retweet. Crooked. Crazy Pocahontas. Foster. Loser. Judge. Congratulations. Radical. Big league.
So now, Alex, I have a question for you. What's your one-word response to that piece?
You were putting me on the spot to answer that? Wow, that was already too many words.
One word.
I mean, I would just echo Trump and say huge. I mean, that was a massive work of video art there.
It's epic.
He has forever changed American politics, John, in many ways, but rhetorically especially.
There are so few of those words I ever thought I would hear uttered.
Bigly. Bigly, not a word.
Very few of them I ever thought I would hear uttered in a presidential campaign.
You don't need to worry about context, syntax, or subject-verb agreement now that it's a post-Trump world.
We will be right back with a bigly close of the show. A big thank you to the Atlantic's Alex Wagner. It is always awesome to have you.
It is always a pleasure to be here, my friend.
BloombergPolitics.com is the place to go for all of your 2016 updates, as well as the latest news about the ongoing gun control fight in Congress. Coming up on Bloomberg TV, Andela CEO Jeremy Johnson. That's on Bloomberg West. Alex, from me and you, until tomorrow, we have this to say.
Namaste.
I'm Sherry Ann, and you're watching Bloomberg West. Let's start with a check of your Bloomberg First World News. President Obama is in Orlando today, comforting survivors and families of victims of Sunday's nightclub massacre.
They are our family. They're part of the American family. And today, the Vice President and I told them on behalf of the American people that our hearts are broken too.
The president also pleaded for Congress to consider gun control measures. UK police say a British member of parliament has died after being attacked. The Labour Party's Jo Cox was meeting with constituents in West Yorkshire when she was shot twice. A suspect has been arrested. Campaigning has been suspended in the British referendum on the European Union. Egyptian investigators say Egypt Air's cockpit voice recorder has been pulled from the Mediterranean Sea. Officials say it was damaged, but the memory unit is intact. The Egypt Air flight crashed en route from Paris to Cairo on May 19th with 66 people on board. The Centers for Disease Control says 3 babies with birth defects caused by